My name is Lewis, 33 years old, and a software engineer in Boston. The condo overlooking the harbor that I saved 6 years for has become a battleground. When I returned from my business trip, the locks were changed, and my sister Stephanie stood in my doorway claiming her artistic soul needed my space more than I did. I never imagined my own parents would fund her lawsuit to steal my home from me. What hurts most is realizing how disposable my feelings have always been to my family. Before I continue my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and if this resonates with you, please hit that like and subscribe button. Growing up in our middle-class suburban neighborhood in Massachusetts, the pattern was always the same. My sister Stephanie was the golden child, the one with the artistic soul who needed special attention, while I was expected to be the responsible one who would be fine no matter what happened. Our family home was comfortable enough, a modest 4-bedroom house with a small backyard where Dad would occasionally grill on summer weekends. But inside those walls there was always an emotional imbalance that I couldn't quite name until I was much older. Mom and Dad, Martha and Robert, weren't bad parents by any conventional measure. They provided for us, never missed a parent-teacher conference, and made sure we had what we needed. But there was always this unspoken hierarchy of attention and affection that tilted heavily toward Stephanie. When she painted a picture, it went on the refrigerator for months. When I brought home straight A's, it was met with a quick, "That's what we expect from you," before the conversation turned back to Stephanie's latest creative endeavor. I was the practical one. The one who did his homework without being asked, who saved his allowance, instead of spending it on impulse purchases, who planned for the future. Stephanie was free-spirited, which often translated to chaotic, unpredictable, and somehow always in need of rescue. When she forgot her science project, my parents stayed up all night helping her complete it. When I needed help with college applications, I was told I was smart enough to figure it out on my own. Despite this imbalance, I carved my own path. I worked hard through high school, earning a scholarship to MIT, where I majored in computer science. College wasn't easy. I juggled classes with part-time jobs at the campus IT department during the school year and internships during summers. I lived in a cramped apartment with 3 roommates to save money, eating ramen more often than I care to remember. Unlike Stephanie, who had her art school tuition fully funded by our parents, despite dropping out after 3 semesters, I graduated with student loans that I diligently paid off over 5 years. After college, I landed a job at a healthcare software company, starting as a junior developer and working my way up to senior engineer and eventually team lead. The work was challenging but fulfilling. We developed systems that helped hospitals manage patient care more efficiently. It wasn't glamorous or creative in the way my family valued, but I took pride in building something that made a real difference in people's lives. For 6 years after starting my career, I lived frugally. I shared an apartment with a friend from college, brought lunch from home, limited eating out, and put aside a significant portion of each paycheck. My goal was clear: to buy my own place, something that would be mine, that I had earned through my own effort and discipline. When I finally had enough for a down payment, I spent months searching for the perfect place. The moment I walked into the Harborview condo, I knew it was the one. It wasn't enormous. 2 bedrooms with an office space that I converted into a home workspace. A modern kitchen with stainless steel appliances that I had upgraded myself, and the crown jewel, a balcony overlooking Boston Harbor. On clear days, the water sparkled, and at night the city lights reflected off its surface. It was my sanctuary, my reward for years of hard work. The condo was in a secure building with a doorman, a small gym in the basement, and a community room that residents could reserve for gatherings. My neighbors were mostly professionals, some older, some younger, but all respectful and pleasant. I'd made friends with several of them, particularly an elderly couple next door, who sometimes brought me homemade cookies, and a doctor down the hall, who shared my interest in hiking. Throughout these years, Stephanie bounced from one artistic endeavor to another. She tried painting, then sculpture, then photography, then experimental film. Each new passion was announced with great fanfare and abandoned within months. She started and dropped out of 3 different arts programs each time, with a different excuse about how the instructors didn't understand her vision or the program was too restrictive for her creative process. Between these artistic pursuits, Stephanie often found herself between opportunities, her euphemism for being unemployed and broke. During these periods, which became increasingly frequent, she would sometimes ask to stay at my place just until things stabilize. Being the brother I was, I agreed, setting clear timelines that she invariably ignored. What should have been week-long stays stretched into months, with Stephanie gradually spreading her belongings throughout my carefully organized space, leaving half-finished art projects on my dining table and bringing home strange-smelling art supplies that permeated the furniture. Each time it took increasingly firm conversations to get her to leave, followed by days of cleaning and rearranging to reclaim my space. After the last such episode, which ended with Stephanie accusing me of stifling her creative process when I asked her to respect my home office during my work hours, I decided that was the last time. I made it clear that while I loved her, she needed to find her own place to live permanently. For a while, things were relatively calm. Stephanie seemed to have found some stability working at an art gallery and renting a room in a shared apartment. We would meet occasionally for coffee or dinner, and while there was still tension, it felt manageable. I focused on my career, my home, and building a life I was proud of. Then came the Seattle project. My company was implementing our system in a major hospital network there, and as team lead, I needed to be on site for the rollout. It was a big opportunity. Successful completion would likely mean a promotion and a significant raise. I prepared meticulously for my 2-week absence, setting up automatic payments for bills, arranging for a neighbor to water my plants, and even leaving detailed notes for the building maintenance staff about a minor plumbing issue they were scheduled to fix while I was away. I left for Seattle feeling confident about the project and secure about leaving my home. I had no idea that in my absence, Stephanie had hatched a plan that would upend my life and force me to confront our family's dysfunction in ways I never imagined possible. The Seattle project had been grueling but successful. After 14 straight days of 12-hour work sessions, troubleshooting integration issues, and training hospital staff, I was beyond exhausted. All I wanted was to get home, take a long shower, and collapse into my own bed. The red-eye flight back to Boston left me bleary-eyed and stiff, but as the taxi approached my building, I felt that wave of relief that comes with returning to your own space. I nodded at the usual doorman, George, as I wheeled my suitcase through the lobby, but instead of his typical friendly greeting, he gave me a confused look. "Can I help you, sir?" he asked, stepping slightly in front of the elevator. "It's me, Lewis," I said, assuming he was just tired or distracted. 12C. George's brow furrowed deeper. "I'm sorry, but 12C belongs to Stephanie now. Are you a friend of hers?" The fatigue-induced fog in my brain suddenly cleared, replaced by sharp confusion. "What?" "No, that's my condo. I've lived here for 3 years. I've been on a business trip for 2 weeks. George looked genuinely uncomfortable. "Sir, I don't know what to tell you. Management informed us that the unit has a new owner. Miss Stephanie has been living there for over a week now." My heart started racing. This had to be some kind of mistake or misunderstanding. I pulled out my keys, showing them to George. "Look, I have the keys right here. I own that condo." "I'm sorry, but the locks were changed last week," George replied. "Building policy when there's a new resident." I stood there, suitcase in hand, unable to process what I was hearing. I tried calling Stephanie immediately, but the call went straight to voicemail. I tried again and again as I sat in the lobby, watching the minutes tick by growing increasingly frantic. After about 20 attempts over the course of an hour, I decided to try my parents. "Oh, Lewis, you're back already." My mother sounded oddly uncomfortable. "Have you spoken to Stephanie?" "No, Mom, I can't reach her. The doorman says she's living in my condo, and they changed the locks." "What the hell is going on?" "Well, honey, Stephanie needed a place that would inspire her art. And your place has that beautiful view. I'm sure she can explain everything. Why don't you wait to talk to her?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own mother was acting as if this was some minor inconvenience rather than my sister literally stealing my home. Before I could respond, she quickly made an excuse about having another call and hung up. 3 more hours passed in the lobby. I was exhausted, still in my travel clothes, and growing increasingly angry. Finally, around 7 in the evening, the elevator doors opened and Stephanie strolled out dressed in paint-splattered overalls with her hair tied up in a messy bun. She froze when she saw me. "Oh," she said as if she'd been caught sneaking a cookie before dinner. "You're back early." "Early? I'm right on schedule." "What the hell are you doing, Stephanie? Why does the doorman think you own my condo?" She had the audacity to roll her eyes. "Can we not do this in the lobby? Come upstairs and we can talk." Too stunned to argue, I followed her to the elevator where she pulled out a set of shiny new keys. My keys. Except they weren't my keys anymore. Once inside my condo, or what used to be my condo, I was hit with another shock. The space was almost unrecognizable. My furniture had been pushed against walls or removed entirely. The dining table was covered with canvases, paint tubes, and what looked like clay modeling tools. The walls that I had carefully painted a soft gray were now splashed with what Stephanie probably considered an artistic mural, but looked to me like chaotic scribbles. "What have you done? Where are my things?" I demanded, my voice rising despite my attempt to stay calm. Stephanie waved her hand dismissively. "Your stuff is in storage. Don't worry, I paid for 3 months up front." Storage. You put my belongings in storage without my permission. This is breaking and entering. This is theft. Don't be so dramatic, Lewis. The space was wasted on you. You're hardly ever here. You're always working. I need this space for my creative process. The light from the harbor, the energy of the water. It speaks to me. I stood there mouth agape as she continued explaining how she'd had an artistic epiphany while staying at my place during my previous business trip 6 months ago. She'd been planning this transition ever since, waiting for the right opportunity, which apparently came in the form of my Seattle trip. You can't just take someone's home because you think you deserve it more, I said, trying to reason with her. I worked for years to afford this place. My name is on the deed. I pay the mortgage. About that, she said, pulling out a folder. I've transferred the utilities to my name, and I've spoken with a real estate attorney about assuming the mortgage. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. That's not how this works. You can't just decide to take over someone else's property. She shrugged, a gesture so casual it made my blood boil. The universe has aligned to provide me with the space I need for my art to flourish. I've already told all the neighbors that I'm the new owner. End of noter. Most of them were really supportive. I later learned she'd been telling people I decided to move to Seattle permanently and had generously given her the condo because she needed it more than I did. She'd even convinced the building manager that this was a planned transfer within the family, which explained why the locks had been changed so easily. The more she spoke, the more I realized this wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment or a misunderstanding. This was calculated. My sister had deliberately waited until I was gone, moved my belongings without permission, changed the locks, switched the utilities, and was now attempting to gaslight me into accepting that my home was no longer mine. "You need to leave," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Now. This is illegal, Stephanie. This is my home, not yours." "Actually, I think you need to leave," she replied, crossing her arms. "I have guests coming over later for a creative visualization workshop, and I need to prepare the space." I tried reasoning with her for another hour, attempting to appeal to her sense of fairness, family loyalty, even basic legality. But Stephanie had always lived in a reality of her own making, one where her desires trumped everyone else's rights. Eventually exhausted, and still in shock, I left to check into a nearby hotel, promising myself this wasn't over. As I lay in the impersonal hotel bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that this betrayal was just the beginning. I had no idea how right I was. The morning after discovering Stephanie's takeover, I called my parents, certain they would intervene once they understood the severity of the situation. My father answered, his voice guarded in a way that immediately set off alarm bells. "Dad, Stephanie has broken into my condo, changed the locks, and put all my belongings in storage without my permission. She's claiming it's her place now. You need to talk some sense into her." The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Lewis, your mother, and I think you might be overreacting a bit. Stephanie is at a crucial point in her artistic development. She needs the right environment to nurture her talent. I nearly dropped the phone. Overreacting. She's stolen my home. The home I saved for years to buy that I pay the mortgage on. Well, you're always so practical, son. You can find another place easily with your computer job. Stephanie's art requires specific conditions to flourish. That harbor view is exactly what she needs for inspiration. The conversation devolved from there, with my parents suggesting I was being selfish for not understanding Stephanie's creative needs. When I pointed out the illegality of her actions, my mother actually said, "Family shouldn't involve lawyers, Louis. This should be resolved between siblings." By the end of the call, the shocking truth was inescapable. My parents were not just aware of Stephanie's actions, they had encouraged them. They had helped her plan this during my absence, seeing nothing wrong with her taking something I had worked years to achieve, because in their eyes, her artistic pursuits were inherently more valuable than my ordinary career. Hanging up, I felt a lifetime of favoritism crystallize into this single, unforgivable betrayal. Every childhood slight, every dismissed achievement, every time my needs were secondary to Stephanie's whims, it all led here to my family believing it was perfectly acceptable to steal my home for Stephanie's art. That afternoon, I located the storage facility where Stephanie had taken my belongings. The manager was sympathetic but required proof of ownership for access since the unit was in Stephanie's name. After providing my ID and some documentation, I was finally allowed in. The sight inside made me physically ill. My carefully curated belongings, furniture I had saved for mementos from trips, even family photos, had been haphazardly thrown into the unit. My grandmother's antique clock, a college graduation gift, lay broken at the bottom of a pile. My laptop and external hard drives containing years of work and personal photos were nowhere to be found. The leather couch I had splurged on for my 30th birthday was scratched and stained with what looked like paint. This wasn't just carelessness, it felt intentional. A physical manifestation of how little my sister valued anything that belonged to me. That evening, I called Ryan, a friend from college who had become a real estate attorney. After explaining the situation, his response was immediate and emphatic. "This is textbook illegal, Louis. Breaking and entering conversion of property, possibly even fraud depending on what she told the building management. You need to file a police report immediately, then get a court order to remove her. I can help with the legal side, but you need to establish an official record of the crime first." Following his advice, I went to the police station the next morning. The officer who took my report listened attentively, but became noticeably less engaged when I mentioned the perpetrator was my sister. "Family disputes can be complicated," he said, his pen hovering over the form. "Have you considered mediation? The courts prefer families to work these things out amongst themselves." "This isn't a dispute," I insisted. "My sister broke into my home, changed the locks, and is illegally occupying property that I own. If a stranger did this, you'd be arresting them." Eventually, he completed the report, but warned me that without signs of forced entry, since Stephanie had a key from her previous stays, and with the family complication, they might consider this a civil rather than criminal matter. Meanwhile, Stephanie had begun posting on social media about her new artistic space overlooking the harbor, sharing photos of my condo transformed into what she called a creative sanctuary. In each image, I could see more of my possessions, either repurposed for her art or pushed aside to make room for her supplies. In one particularly galling post, she used my dining table, an expensive piece I had commissioned from a local woodworker, as a platform for a found object sculpture that appeared to be made from items taken from my storage closet. Her artist friends commented enthusiastically, praising her brave new chapter and the energy of the space. Some even started leaving notes on my hotel room door. Stephanie had apparently told them where I was staying, suggesting I was stifling creative expression by trying to reclaim my home. One note read, "True art requires sacrifice. Your sister's vision deserves this space more than your materialistic lifestyle does. Another property is theft anyway. Be grateful your condo is being used for something meaningful instead of just existing as a status symbol." The injustice of it all was overwhelming. I had never been materialistic. I had worked hard, saved carefully, and bought a home I loved. Now, I was being villainized for wanting to keep what was legally mine. As days passed, my anger grew, but so did my determination. Ryan helped me file for an emergency hearing to get a court order against Stephanie. I documented everything meticulously: the condition of my belongings in storage, the social media posts, the changed locks, the utility transfers, building a case that would clearly establish her actions as illegal. But even as I fought through proper channels, the emotional toll was immense. I couldn't concentrate at work, where I had just returned from a successful project, only to be distracted by this personal crisis. I lost weight, unable to eat properly, with the constant knot of anxiety in my stomach. Friends reached out concerned about my sudden withdrawal, but I found it difficult to explain the situation without sounding like I was caught in some bizarre family drama. The truth was too absurd, too painful. My sister had stolen my home because she thought her artistic soul deserved it more than I did, and my parents were actively supporting her in this theft. How do you explain to others that your family values one child's whims over another child's basic rights? How do you admit that the people who should love you unconditionally see you as less deserving of respect and consideration? As I waited for the court date, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy while living out of a hotel room, I had no idea that Stephanie and my parents were preparing to escalate this betrayal even further in ways that would test the limits of my endurance and forever alter our family dynamic. 3 weeks after Stephanie had taken over my condo, just as I was finalizing preparations for the emergency hearing with Ryan, I received an envelope from a law firm I didn't recognize. Inside was a formal letter that made my blood run cold. "Dear Mr. Lewis Wilson," it began, "this firm represents Miss Stephanie Wilson in the matter of the property dispute concerning the condominium at Harborview Residences Unit 12C. Our client asserts that said property was always intended to be transferred to her use as per family understanding and verbal agreement. We request that you cease all harassment and legal actions against our client immediately." The letter went on to claim that I had verbally gifted the condo to Stephanie during a family dinner last Christmas, something that absolutely never happened, and that my parents would testify to this arrangement. It concluded with a threat of countersuit for emotional distress if I continued pursuing legal action against her. I called Ryan, immediately forwarding him the letter. "This is insane," I told him, my voice shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "She's claiming I gave her my condo as a Christmas present, and my parents are going to back up this lie." "It's a desperate tactic," Ryan assured me. "Verbal agreements for real estate transfers aren't enforceable anyway, and they have zero documentation to back this up." "But Lewis, law firms like this one don't come cheap. Where is Stephanie getting the money for this?" That question led me down a rabbit hole I wasn't prepared for. I knew Stephanie's art gallery job barely covered her basic expenses, let alone attorney fees. When I called my cousin Emma, who had always been a neutral party in family matters, she reluctantly confirmed what I had begun to suspect. "Your parents liquidated some of their retirement investments last week," she admitted. "Aunt Martha told my mom they needed to help Stephanie with an important opportunity." "I'm sorry, Lewis. I didn't know what it was for until now." The realization that my parents had not only encouraged Stephanie's theft but were now funding her legal defense against me was the deepest cut yet. They were literally investing their retirement savings to help one child steal from the other. Determined to confront this head-on, I insisted on a family dinner. Surprisingly, everyone agreed, perhaps thinking they could convince me to drop the matter in person. We met at a neutral restaurant, my parents, Stephanie, and me. What followed was the most painful meal of my life. My father, looking uncomfortable but resolute, explained their position. "Lewis, you have to understand. Stephanie's art could be her big break. She needs the right space to create in. You have a steady job. You can live anywhere. That condo is perfect for my studio work," Stephanie added, as if we were discussing borrowing a sweater rather than stealing a home. "The light, the view, the energy. It's already inspiring me in ways you couldn't possibly understand. So because I chose a stable career and worked hard for what I have, I deserve to have it taken from me." I asked, struggling to keep my voice level. "And because Stephanie chose an uncertain path, she deserves to take what someone else earned." My mother reached across the table, patting my hand in that condescending way she had perfected over the years. "Honey, you don't need that particular condo. You only work there." Stephanie will live and create there. Her art could be worth millions someday, if she has the right environment. And what about the mortgage that I pay? The deed in my name? The years I saved while living with roommates to afford the down payment I challenged. Well, my father said, clearing his throat, we've discussed that. Your mother and I are willing to help Stephanie with the payments until her career takes off. We see it as an investment in her future. An investment they had never offered to make in mine. The double standard was so blatant, so cruel, that for a moment I couldn't speak. I found some interesting documents in the condo, by the way, I said, finally pulling out copies I'd made before leaving. Stephanie has been practicing my signature. Care to explain that? Stephanie's face flushed. My parents looked away uncomfortably. I was just preparing some paperwork, Stephanie mumbled. For when you agreed to transfer the condo. You mean for when you forged my signature on documents? That's fraud, Stephanie. It's a criminal offense. The conversation deteriorated further when I revealed I'd learned Stephanie had been telling our mutual friends that I had promised her the condo years ago and was now going back on my word. Several friends had messaged me asking why I was being so difficult about Stephanie's condo. You've been deliberately lying to turn people against me, I said, the full weight of her betrayal settling on my shoulders. I'm just telling my truth, she replied, with the self-righteousness that had always been her shield. You never appreciated that space the way I do. You're too busy with your coding to see the potential it has for real creation. As the dinner ended, my mother tried one last appeal. Louis, please drop this legal nonsense. Family shouldn't sue family. Just find another place and let your sister have this one thing. One thing, I repeated, incredulous. She has taken my home, damaged my belongings, lied to my friends, forged my signature, and is now trying to sue me with your financial backing. This isn't one thing. This is a pattern of entitlement that you've enabled her entire life. I left the restaurant and sat in my car for nearly an hour, unable to drive as waves of emotion washed over me. The family I thought I had, flawed, but fundamentally loving, had been an illusion. The truth was far uglier. I was valued only for what I could provide, expected to sacrifice endlessly for Stephanie's dreams, while my own were dismissed as unimportant. That night in my hotel room, I finally broke down completely. Years of suppressed hurt of telling myself that my parents' favoritism wasn't really that bad, of making excuses for Stephanie's selfish behavior. It all came crashing down. I cried until there were no tears left, then lay staring at the ceiling, feeling hollowed out. The next day at work, I couldn't focus. My team noticed, offering concerned glances as I stared blankly at my computer screen. My boss called me into his office, asking if everything was all right. Family issues, I managed to say. I'm working through them. Take the time you need, he said kindly. The Seattle project was a huge success. You've earned some personal days, but time wouldn't solve this problem. As I left the office that evening, I knew I had reached a turning point. I could continue being the family doormat, sacrificing my needs and happiness for people who would never value them, or I could stand up for myself and what was rightfully mine. For the first time in my life, I chose myself. The morning after that devastating family dinner, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt since this nightmare began. The grief and shock had crystallized into something harder, more resolute. If my family wouldn't respect my rights, I would have to enforce them myself. Systematically, and without compromise. My first call was to Ryan, declining his previous offer to represent me. I need someone with more experience in aggressive property litigation, I explained. Someone who won't hesitate because this is a family matter. Ryan understood immediately, referring me to Alexandra Winters, a top property attorney known for her uncompromising approach to clear-cut cases of ownership violation. Her retainer wasn't cheap, but at this point I was willing to spend whatever necessary to reclaim what was mine. Alexandra was direct and efficient during our first meeting. This is legally straightforward but emotionally complex, she observed after reviewing my documentation. Your ownership is ironclad. The challenge will be countering the narrative your sister is creating and dealing with the family dynamics. Under her guidance, I began building an overwhelming case. We gathered my purchase documents, mortgage statements, tax records, home improvement receipts, everything that established my clear ownership and investment in the property. Alexandra also suggested documenting the timeline of events meticulously, including screenshots of Stephanie's social media posts about her new place and testimonials from neighbors who knew me as the rightful owner. While the legal preparations moved forward, I took additional steps to protect myself. I installed security cameras in the hallway outside my condo, with building management's reluctant permission, which soon captured Stephanie removing items from my home, including my rare vinyl collection and some expensive electronics that hadn't been in the storage unit. "She's selling your possessions," Alexandra confirmed after reviewing the footage. "This strengthens our case considerably. It shows clear intent to permanently deprive you of your property." With this evidence, we added theft charges to our filing, increasing the pressure on Stephanie and, by extension, my parents. I also began the painful process of untangling my financial affairs from my family's influence. I changed the beneficiaries on my life insurance and retirement accounts, removing my parents and sister. I updated my emergency contacts at work and with my doctor's office. I even changed my passwords and security questions on all accounts, many of which had previously included family references. Each severed connection was both a wound and a liberation. I was dismantling the infrastructure of a family relationship that had been one-sided for too long. A breakthrough came when I discovered, through careful review of bank statements, several large withdrawals from my checking account during times when Stephanie had stayed at my condo. Small amounts I might have overlooked, but these totaled over $3,000. When I questioned my bank, they confirmed the transactions had been made in person with my ID and signature. "She's been forging your signature for some time," Alexandra noted grimly. "This isn't opportunistic. It's premeditated." Armed with this new information, I confronted my parents again, this time via email with Alexandra copied. I detailed Stephanie's forgery and theft, with documented evidence concluding, "If you continue supporting these criminal actions, I will be forced to include you in the legal proceedings as accomplices after the fact." Their response was unexpected. Instead of the dismissive attitude I'd come to expect, my father called sounding shaken. "Louis, we had no idea about the bank withdrawals or selling your things," he said. "We thought this was just about the condo. Stephanie told us you had verbally agreed to let her use it while you were focused on your career." "And you believe that?" Without ever confirming with me, I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the anger bubbling beneath. She's always been so passionate about her needs," he admitted. "Sometimes it's easier to believe her than to question." It was the closest thing to an acknowledgement of their enabling behavior I had ever heard, though far from an apology. I ended the call by making my position clear. I'm proceeding with legal action. Stephanie needs to vacate my property and return everything she's taken, or the consequences will be severe, for her and potentially for you both. Later that day, Alexandra delivered another piece of surprising news. In researching Stephanie's financial situation for potential damages, claims she had uncovered significant debt. Over $40,000 in credit card balances, unpaid loans, and a tax lien from unreported income from art. Salis. This adds another dimension to her motivation, Alexandra explained. She's not just after your condo for artistic inspiration. She's financially desperate. My guess is she planned to either sell it eventually or use it as collateral for loans to cover her debts. This revelation sparked another memory. Stephanie asking to borrow my financial documents for a mixed media art project about 6 months earlier. I had declined, but now I wondered if she had found them anyway during one of her stays, laying the groundwork for her plan. With each new discovery, my resolve strengthened. I scheduled a meeting with my building's management company, bringing Alexandra and our complete documentation package. The property manager, initially resistant to becoming involved in what he still viewed as a family dispute, changed his tune considerably when Alexandra outlined the building's potential liability for facilitating an illegal occupation. We were misled, he admitted, reviewing the falsified documents Stephanie had provided. She presented what appeared to be a notarized transfer agreement with your signature. A forgery, Alexandra stated firmly. And accepting it without proper verification has created significant liability for your company. By the end of the meeting, the management company agreed to provide a formal statement, acknowledging that I was the legitimate owner and that they had been deceived. They also agreed to grant me access to the building's security footage, which showed Stephanie moving in my absence and more damningly directing movers to take numerous items from my condo to various locations, including what appeared to be a pawn shop. That evening, I returned to my hotel to find another note from one of Stephanie's art friends. Unlike the previous hostile messages, this one was apologetic, Lewis. I just learned what really happened. Stephanie told us you had gifted her the condo because you were moving to Seattle permanently. I'm sorry for the things I said. Not all of us support what she's doing. It was a small vindication, but meaningful. The truth was beginning to emerge even among those who had initially believed Stephanie's version of events. The final piece fell into place when Alexandra secured a temporary restraining order against Stephanie based on the evidence of forgery, theft, and the unauthorized occupation. With this legal document in hand, I finally felt the balance of power shifting. After weeks of feeling helpless, I was taking control of my life again, not just my property, but my sense of self-worth and autonomy. As we prepared for the court hearing that would determine the final outcome, I realized that regardless of the legal resolution, I had already achieved something significant. I had broken the pattern of capitulation that had defined my relationship with my family for decades. For the first time, I was standing firm in the face of their expectations that I would sacrifice my needs for Stephanie's desires. That night I slept soundly for the first time since returning from Seattle, no longer plagued by anxiety dreams of homelessness or helplessness. Whatever happened next, I knew I would face it on my terms, not theirs. The morning of the court hearing arrived with a mix of anticipation and dread. I had spent weeks preparing with Alexandra, reviewing our evidence, practicing my testimony, and steeling myself for the confrontation that awaited. My parents had confirmed they would attend, though their messages had been terse and non-committal about whose side they would support. The courthouse was imposing, all marble and echoing hallways that amplified every footstep and whispered conversation. As Alexandra and I walked toward the designated courtroom, I spotted Stephanie and her attorney huddled in conversation near the entrance. She was dressed more conservatively than usual, her typically flamboyant style toned down to present a more respectable image to the judge. My parents arrived moments later, looking uncomfortable and out of place. My mother attempted a weak smile in my direction, which I couldn't bring myself to return. The betrayal was still too raw, the wound too fresh for such casual reconciliation. Inside the courtroom, the proceedings began with surprising efficiency. Judge Eleanor Martinez, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s with sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing, reviewed the case summary before addressing the room. Let me be clear, she began, this case involves allegations of illegal occupation, forgery, conversion of property, and potential fraud. These are serious matters regardless of the family relationship between the parties. Stephanie's attorney attempted to frame the situation as a misunderstanding between siblings that should be resolved through mediation rather than court action. Judge Martinez cut him off mid-sentence. Counselor, I've reviewed the evidence submitted by the plaintiff. This appears to be well beyond a misunderstanding. Your client changed locks on a property she does not own, moved the owner's possessions without permission, and there's compelling evidence of signature forgery. Let's not waste the court's time characterizing criminal acts as family squabbles. Alexandra presented our case, methodically displaying documentation of my ownership, the security footage of Stephanie removing my belongings, evidence of the forged signatures, and testimonials from neighbors confirming my long-term residence and Stephanie's recent arrival. When it was Stephanie's attorney's turn, he struggled to present a coherent defense. His claims about verbal agreements fell apart under the judge's scrutiny, and his attempts to paint Stephanie as acting in good faith were undermined by the clear evidence of premeditation in her actions. The turning point came when Judge Martinez asked Stephanie directly about the forged documents. Miss Wilson, did you sign your brother's name on these transfer documents? Stephanie hesitated, glancing at her attorney, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. I signed them, yes, but Lewis had verbally agreed to let me use the condo. I was just formalizing what we had already decided. So you admit to forgery, the judge stated rather than asked. And these bank withdrawals using your brother's identification, did you make those as well? Something in Stephanie seemed to snap. The facade of reasonable artist gave way to the entitled persona I had known my entire life. He doesn't need that money like I do. He has a corporate job with benefits and stability. Do you know how hard it is to be an artist in this economy? That condo is wasted on him. He doesn't appreciate the creative potential of that space. Her outburst continued, becoming increasingly unhinged as she detailed how her art deserved the harbor view, how my conventional lifestyle was less valuable than her creative pursuits, and how I had always been the favorite despite her being the one with actual talent. This last claim was so disconnected from reality that I actually laughed out loud, earning a sharp look from the judge, though no reprimand followed. Judge Martinez let Stephanie exhaust her tirade before responding with ice in her voice. "Miss Wilson, this court is not concerned with your opinions about your brother's lifestyle choices or the relative value of different professions. We are concerned with property rights which are clearly established in this case." Her ruling was swift and comprehensive. Stephanie was ordered to vacate the premises, immediately return all removed property, and pay damages for items sold or damaged. The judge also issued a permanent restraining order preventing Stephanie from entering my building without written permission, and referred the forgery evidence to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges. Miss Wilson, Judge Martinez concluded, looking directly at Stephanie. "I strongly suggest you seek counseling to address your sense of entitlement and boundary issues. This court sees many family disputes, but few with such blatant disregard for another's basic property rights." As we left the courtroom, Stephanie rushed past, tears streaming down her face, ignoring our parents' attempts to comfort her. I felt a complex mix of emotions. Vindication, certainly, but also a profound sadness for what our family had become. That afternoon, accompanied by 2 police officers assigned by the court, I returned to my condo for the first time in over a month. The sight that greeted me was worse than I had imagined. Beyond the disarray and artistic chaos, there was deliberate damage. Holes punched in walls, wine stains on carpets, broken fixtures. My bedroom had been converted into what Stephanie called an emotion exploration space, with angry words and symbols painted directly onto the walls. "Looks like vandalism on top of everything else," one of the officers commented, taking photos for the supplementary report. As we continued through the condo, we discovered more evidence of Stephanie's true intentions. Hidden in my former office were printouts of real estate listings showing my condo's estimated value applications for home equity loans in my name, and a draft listing for selling the property, all with forged signatures. She wasn't just staying here temporarily, I realized aloud. She was planning to sell my home out from under me. The officers added these documents to their evidence collection, assuring me they would be passed to the detective handling the potential criminal case. My parents arrived as the police were finishing their documentation. Seeing the state of the condo seemed to finally shatter their illusions about Stephanie's actions. My mother gasped at the destruction, while my father stood silent, his face ashen. "Louis, we had no idea." My mother began, her voice trembling. "She told us she was just redecorating a bit to make it work as a studio. This island, this is vandalism. And theft," I added, pointing to the empty spaces where my television sound system and computer had been, "and fraud given these loan applications." "Son, I don't know what to say," my father offered, his confident demeanor replaced by genuine distress. "We thought this was just about Stephanie needing space for her art. We never imagined she would destroy your home like this." Part of me wanted to rage at them, to demand where this concern had been weeks ago when I first told them what was happening. But looking at their faces, truly seeing the shock and dismay, I realized they too had been manipulated by Stephanie's lifelong patterns, perhaps even more thoroughly than I had. "This isn't just about the condo," I told them quietly. "This is about a lifetime of enabling behavior that made Stephanie believe she was entitled to take whatever she wanted, regardless of who it belonged to or how hard they worked for it." They didn't argue, which was perhaps the most telling response of all. Later that evening, as I began the process of cleaning up and reclaiming my space, I received a series of unexpected messages. First, from the elderly couple next door, offering help with repairs and expressing their relief at my return. Then from several of Stephanie's artist friends, apologizing for their earlier hostility and explaining that Stephanie had told them elaborate lies about the situation. Most surprising was a message from Stephanie's roommate from her previous apartment. "You should know Stephanie has been planning this for months. She told us she was going to reclaim your condo because you didn't deserve it, and was going to sell it to pay off her debts. I didn't realize she was serious until now. I'm sorry I didn't warn you. This confirmation of Stephanie's premeditation reinforced the justice of my actions, while deepening the sadness of recognizing who my sister truly was. Not just entitled and self-centered, but calculating and willing to destroy my life for her benefit. As I sorted through the wreckage of my home that night, separating what could be salvaged from what was destroyed beyond repair, I realized I was doing the same with my family relationships. Assessing what could potentially be rebuilt, and the present, what was damaged beyond recovery. The victory in court had secured my property, but the greater victory was internal. I had finally broken free from the dysfunctional dynamic that had defined my family relationships for decades. Whatever came next, I would face it on my terms, with boundaries firmly in place and a newfound respect for my own worth. In the months following the court victory, rebuilding became my focus. Not just my physical space, but my life as a whole. The condo required significant repairs: walls repainted, carpets, replaced fixtures restored. Each repair felt symbolic, a reclaiming of space that had been violated, a restoration of order from chaos. The deeper rebuilding, however, was internal. Years of family conditioning had taught me to minimize my needs, to accept that Stephanie's desires would always take precedence over my rights. Breaking that pattern required consistent effort and the support of a therapist who specialized in family trauma. What you experienced wasn't just sibling rivalry, Dr. Harrison explained during one session. It was a systematic family dynamic that positioned you as the provider and your sister as the entitled recipient. Your parents enabled this imbalance throughout your lives. Understanding the pattern was the first step toward breaking it. I began to recognize how this dynamic had influenced other relationships in my life. My tendency to overgive to friends who under-reciprocated my discomfort with setting boundaries. My belief that I needed to earn love through sacrifice and accommodation. With this awareness came the difficult task of establishing new boundaries with my family. My parents, shaken by the court case and the undeniable evidence of Stephanie's intentions, made tentative efforts to repair our relationship. I met these with cautious openness, willing to listen but unwilling to return to old patterns. I love you both, I told them during a carefully arranged lunch 3 months after the court hearing. But I need you to understand that our relationship can only continue if you respect my boundaries and recognize the harm that was done. Not just by Stephanie, but by the family dynamic that made her actions seem acceptable to you. To their credit, they listened. My father, traditionally dismissive of therapy or emotional discussions, agreed to attend family counseling sessions. My mother, whose enabling had been perhaps more damaging through its gentle persistence, began to recognize how her peacemaking had often come at my expense. Progress was slow and inconsistent. There were setbacks, moments when old habits reasserted themselves, when my mother would subtly suggest I should help Stephanie financially because she's struggling, or my father would minimize the seriousness of what had happened. Each time I had to restate my boundaries firmly, sometimes walking away from conversations that veered into unhealthy territory. Stephanie remained the most difficult situation. The district attorney had decided to pursue charges for the forgery and theft, resulting in a plea deal that required her to complete community service and repay the value of the items she had sold. Our direct contact was limited by the restraining order, but through my parents I learned she was living with a friend working at a different gallery and reportedly attending court-mandated therapy. I received one letter from her 6 months after the court case. Unlike the apology I might have hoped for, it was a strange mixture of self-justification. I still believe artists need supportive environments, more than people with conventional jobs, and misdirected blame. If you had been more generous, with your space, none of this would have happened. I didn't respond. Perhaps the most unexpected outcome was the connections I formed with others who had experienced similar family dynamics. After sharing parts of my story with a colleague whose brother had stolen his inheritance, we started an informal support group that grew to include several people navigating family estrangement or boundary setting with difficult relatives. You're not alone. In this became our unofficial motto. A reminder that family dysfunction often follows recognizable patterns, and that healing is possible when those patterns are identified and challenged. As the one-year anniversary of the Condo incident, as my friends now called it, approached, I realized how profoundly my life had changed. My home was fully restored, more comfortable and personal than before. My career had advanced partly because the energy previously spent accommodating family demands was now channeled into creative problem-solving at work. Most importantly, my sense of self had strengthened. I no longer defined my worth by my usefulness to others, or believed I was somehow less deserving of respect than those around me. I had also developed a more nuanced understanding of forgiveness. Contrary to the popular notion that forgiveness means reconciliation or pretending harm never occurred, I discovered that true forgiveness was about releasing the expectation that the past could have been different. I forgave my family not by excusing their actions, but by accepting that they had acted according to deeply ingrained patterns, just as I had. This forgiveness didn't mean resuming relationships without change. With my parents, it meant a new, more honest connection with clear boundaries. With Stephanie, it meant acceptance that we might never have a healthy relationship given her continued inability to recognize the harm she had caused. In time, I even found gratitude for the experience, painful as it had been. Without that dramatic violation of boundaries, I might have continued indefinitely in the role of family doormat, never recognizing my right to protect my own well-being. The final step in my healing journey was reaching out to others who might be trapped in similar dynamics. I began volunteering with a community mediation center, helping people navigate family property disputes, with an emphasis on recognizing unhealthy patterns and establishing appropriate boundaries. Sharing my experience, stripped of identifying details, helped others recognize their own situations and find the courage to address them. My condo, once a battleground, has become a true sanctuary, not just from the outside world, but from the internal expectations that had limited my sense of worth for so long. The harbor view that Stephanie had claimed her art deserved now reminds me daily of the peace that comes from standing firm in your truth, even when those you love try to convince you that your needs matter less than others. If there's one lesson I would share from this experience, it's this. Your worth is not determined by your usefulness to others or by your willingness to sacrifice your needs. Real love, whether from family, friends, or partners, respects boundaries and recognizes each person's inherent right to dignity and autonomy. I still believe in family, but now I understand that healthy family relationships are built on mutual respect rather than predetermined roles or obligations. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and ultimately for others is to say no to patterns that diminish anyone's humanity. What boundaries have you had to set in your own life? Have you ever had to stand up to family members who didn't respect what was rightfully yours? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about navigating difficult relationships. Remember, setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's essential for healthy connections and personal well-being. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I wish you strength and clarity in your own.